My name is Mark Bolenbach. I'm Director of Product Management at Appian. My responsibilities are the process orchestration. I lead the process orchestration group, which also includes, not only our process engines, but also integration and identity and access management. And with me today is Alex Flickstein, from Director of Finance Transformation at Asplund, who's one of our customers. He's going to be talking a little bit in what I call Act 3 of our session. Now, let me go back and just say that I've divided this into 4 separate areas. You're in rethinking integration with process orchestration, data fabric, and pre-built connectors. Very long title. The main point I want you to focus on is rethinking integration with process orchestration. Now, we're going to go into that a little bit more and what I mean by that, but these 4 sections are thinking about integration, rethinking integration, thinking from the field, and then also thinking ahead. So the first part is important, I believe, because in order to rethink something, you have to do a check on yourself and say, well, how do I think about it today? So that's really the question for you. How do you think about integration? If we were in a smaller venue and we had an opportunity to have a dialogue on this, I'd probably canvass the audience, but since we don't, we're a larger room and I have the mic, I'm just gonna go ahead and kind of share a little bit of my story, especially over the past 20 years as I've been involved in integrating systems in 3 separate industries before joining Appian. Especially in my previous company, we were in the early 2000s, we were tasked, we developed an integration competency center, and we were given the opportunity to develop a common integration architecture for all of our ERP applications. The idea that we had was to also incorporate partner systems that invariably our customers were using, but we wanted to have a common integration architecture, not only for our applications, but for them as well. Now, we were influenced very heavily at the time by a concept called enterprise application integration. And it's interesting when Jake Rank talked about things coming back around. I think there's some ideas that were espoused in enterprise application integration that are coming back today and actually have been in vogue for a while. But one expert that really influenced us a lot was Gregor Hoppe, who wrote the book Enterprise Integration Patterns. Now, Hoppe says you can think about integration in a couple of different ways, and he's gone on to elaborate on this in subsequent writing. But one of the ways is integration intent. And with this, he says the problem that we need to think about the problem that we're trying to solve. And he says these can be distilled into a number of different categories. You get into information portals, data replication, shared business processes, or shared business functions, service-oriented architecture, distributed business processes, or B2B type integration. He said there's also another way of thinking about it, which is more from a mechanics perspective. How do you do integration? It's the style of the mechanism that you use for moving data around. And there, he said, it's really, you're sometimes constrained by the applications that you're working with. But he said there's, essentially you can do file transfer, a shared database, remote procedure invocation, or messaging. Now, we were using this kind of as an analytical framework, and we said there's some certain things that we wanted to incorporate into the design of our integration architecture, and that included data replication, the concept of shared business functions, having more of a service orientation where applications would be exposing functions, and then also messaging. Now, we were in the higher education domain, and as I said, we had large ERP applications that were mostly for the back end of an institution, but invariably our customers had tens up to 100 or more discrete applications that needed to share data. A lot of times this was student information, but it could also be faculty information. It could be the course information. Course information had to go to the bookstore. Registration had to go to the bursar's office for billing. There was a number of different integrations going on, and a lot of times they would facilitate this through point-to-point integrations, API calls where they could between these systems. But what that led to was a number of challenges, which included some data redundancy, also the scalability and the maintainability of this architecture was left a little bit to be desired. So our vision was to introduce something that we referred to as an integration hub, where, again, principles of enterprise application integration, and we would have a central hub through which connections would be made, or to which connections would be made and distributed to the appropriate system. The intent was to build a common programming model for our partners and for our own applications, and to provide consistency in moving data around the enterprise. And really, that's what we built. In fact, I was thinking about this. We built this twice, and I would have to kind of elaborate on that a little bit more. But we essentially built a very, what we felt was a sophisticated application architecture that was very data-centric. Central to the design was a concept of data ownership. There were certain systems of record that were responsible for were the owners of data, and those systems, in order to participate in this architecture, had to do two things. One, they had to expose APIs. First off, they had to publish data change events to the enterprise in order for other applications to consume that and update their data stores. This removed some of the batch-oriented movement of data between systems. The other thing that these applications needed to do was to introduce APIs, or expose APIs, by which the non-authoritative applications could request data changes. So it was, we had a lot of success with this. This was actually met with a lot of enthusiasm by our partners and by our customers, and it worked. To an extent. We did provide a common programming model. We did reduce a lot of data redundancy. Actually, there was a lot of redundancy between the systems. We removed a lot of the batch-oriented processing, and we reduced a lot of the point-to-point integrations. And that provided reduced maintenance on the part of our customers. But there were some challenges. And first was that the data definitions were pretty much owned by our company. We were the ones, we did work with our partners, but for the most part, we were defining what the data ownership criteria were. And a lot of it was our systems owned this particular quantum of data, this particular grouping of data. And while that worked, in a lot of cases, there were other cases where those were too coarse-grained data definitions where others couldn't really participate in that. They really owned a part of the data and these other systems, and they felt like they were the authoritative source for those. Second, there were really no adapters to common systems. We had a very large partner community, and the partners built adapters to this architecture for their own applications, but things like any of the Microsoft suite of applications, or some of the Google applications, or others that were commonly used, we didn't offer any of those kinds of adapters. And finally, the data-centric nature, I think we focused on that a little bit too much. We didn't have a concept of orchestrating a process or orchestrating integration across a business process. And as we got into this, we found that this was really a critical need. And towards the end of my tenure there, we actually introduced a concept which, if any of you were at Appian World last year, I kind of alluded to when kind of building and my first introduction into Appian. As we introduced this, it was a low-code platform, and someone said, hey, we're not Appian, why are we doing low code? But anyway, I digress. It was really focused on building integration pipelines, more of a process orientation to integration. It still didn't address the need for looking at things from a business process perspective. And really, that's the thesis that I want to address. You've heard today and yesterday that Appian believes that AI works best in process. I'm going to augment that or adjust that a little bit and say I believe that integration works best in process as well. And that's my experience there, and some of my experience here at Appian working with customers. I've really come to believe that we really need to focus first on the business process and what you're trying to automate, and then use integration as an enabling tool. So let me kind of rewind and look back at what Gregor Hopus said to emphasize this point. First, the concept of integration intent, or predominantly the concept of integration intent. Not to throw him under the bus, I mean, he's written much more than I ever will, and has probably had thought about this a lot more. But when I look at his answers to the questions of what's the problem that we're trying to solve, I don't think in terms of information portals or data replication. I think in terms of we want to reduce the manual data entry in the claims process. Or we want to streamline our customer billing workflow. Or we want to provide a single pane of glass for our CSRs that aggregate and display all the data so that we can improve customer service. These are business-oriented outcomes that really need to be addressed and really should be driving your integration strategy. Now, to be sure, these answers can be abstracted into one of his categories, and I believe that he does that, and you probably agree with that. But the main point that I'm focusing on is that we really should focus on the business process. Think about it this way. You have a business process. It has a start and an end and a series of steps. You have data coming into the system. It could be through a web form. It could be through a document or an email. You want to categorize, understand what's coming in there. This could be an agent. This could be some kind of OCR technologies, but you're capturing the data that's coming into you, and you need to categorize that and then store it within the appropriate system of record. You may augment that data. We talked a bit this morning, or even yesterday, about the claims process. In a claim, you have to verify coverage for the claim. For a loan process, you might be checking the customer's credit, but there's some external invocation of APIs in order to augment the data or to round out the data that you have coming in so that you can then make decisions based on that data. You might then route that to an individual, or there could be some rules-based process or other AI-augmented process that is going to make that decision on how do we disposition this claim or loan or other kind of case that's coming in. And finally, once that's closed, you're storing that, you're sending it to any kind of other downstream systems in order to close out the case and just to update all of your records. If you look at this, the main point here is what the central piece in all of this is process orchestration. And it's the backbone of your entire process. It's augmented, or what it uses is data services and automation services to facilitate the business process. Now, when I depict it this way, one of my team said, we don't really tend to think about process this way at Appian, or we don't tend to depict it that way. It's kind of more like, oh, I'm sorry, I missed a key point. Integration comes into play in each one of these layers. So mostly in the area of data services for connecting to your data sources, and then also the automation services to augment data or to perform a business function in another system. My point here was that a lot of times we think about process this way. It's all of those things combined together. It's the flow as well as the individual services that are invoked. And I agree with that. But my point here is that the orchestration of the process is critical, and you need a highly scalable system that allows you to do that. And interestingly, and I really didn't plan this, I didn't realize that we were going to talk about this so much at this conference, but Gartner believes this too. Orchestration, they say, this is a slide from their introduction of BOAT. You heard a little bit about the BOAT concept, business orchestration and automation technologies, in today's keynote. Allison talked about that. Med had talked about it yesterday. But they say orchestration is central to a number of different services: bots, APIs, data, infrastructure, human tasks. It's a very similar concept to my diagram. It's just depicted a little bit differently. Kind of looks like my integration hub. But BOAT, if you weren't paying attention this morning, it's this idea of, it's a class of software that focuses on automating and orchestrating end-to-end business processes, weaving together disparate systems to solve a business process or to automate a business process. It's it's almost like a Venn diagram, overlapping of the low-code application platforms, business process automation, RPA, and integration platform as a service. And we believe, first off, it's an emerging market, and we believe that we fit very well in this. Appian and this whole concept of Boat, as you heard this morning, is that it's a unified platform. It takes a business-driven approach to automation. The automation, the focus is end-to-end, not just individual tasks or portions of the business process, but the business process as a whole. It includes system integration, so connectors to disparate systems, and finally, flexibility and scalability. So I feel like that we fit in very well. Allison said that this morning as well. And I believe that the scalability mechanisms and improvements that we've made in our infrastructure, both in 2024 and that we're making now in 2025, are really going to set us apart, in addition to all the AI augmentation that you heard about in this morning's keynote and yesterday's as well. So yeah, Appian's on board with Boat. Okay, sorry, that's unintended. What I'm going to do is I just want to cover, Allison did a great job this morning covering a lot of these things. I just want to put them in the context of this diagram and talk a little bit about data services and how integration where integration fits there, and also how it fits in the automation services. Then I'm going to stop talking. Alex and I are going to have a conversation about how Asplund has taken some of these principles and applied them, and then I'm going to close out with a little bit of looking towards the future. So data fabric, you heard a lot about data fabric. This is really one of our most revolutionary, I would say, features in the Appian platform. And it's something that I've really become enamored with. I had some responsibility for the underlying engine 2 years ago and worked with that team, and also worked with Kevin on some of the implementations of the data fabric. But I find it to be revolutionary, especially coming from a data-centric background. Here, it's just a different perspective. Instead of replicating data between systems, you're replicating data to Appian. And by doing so, you're defining your data definitions. You're defining what your data is like and where that data is sourced from. You can build relationships between it. So the data from these disparate systems can be related. It can be augmented. We didn't really cover that a lot today, but you can create more user-defined fields that either aggregate or have calculations on data. You can also apply security so that the integrity of your business process and your data are maintained. Now, undergirding the data fabric are these connectors to existing systems. There's over on the left side, there's the concept of a named system. Now, a named system is a specific target application for which Appian provides a connector. These are things like SharePoint, Dynamics 365, or another category of named systems are our connectors for the databases that we support natively, like Oracle, Postgres, DB2, SQL Server, there's a few others. So those are ways of connecting to data and pulling that into the data fabric. But essentially, that's an integration, and that's a mechanism for integrating Appian and getting the data co-located with the business process engine so we can automate the business process. Then we get into web services. The web services are more RESTful endpoints that if there's no other integration mechanism, or if they're exposing a REST endpoint, if we don't have a connector for it, we can use either of those that are defined with OpenAPI or that are just using more traditional REST semantics over HTTP, HTTPS. About 2 years ago, we also introduced another mechanism called JDBC connected system. Now, the JDBC connected system allows you to connect to virtually any JDBC data source, and then also use a comparable integration design object to write the SQL to get the data out. And a lot of customers have been using this, and I really think this was a really fantastic addition to the data fabric because it really increased the footprint of data fabric. If any of those don't work, you can roll your own. We have an integration SDK that is used for building connected systems, and really it's used for building all those connected systems that are depicted there. Now, the connectors and data fabrics, security mechanisms, the definition, the modeling interface, and the synchronization technologies really allow you to unify, secure, and optimize the data that's spread across the enterprise, and all towards the idea of automating the business process that you want. Automating your business process. It's essentially a virtual layer on top of all your enterprise systems. Now, let's move on to the automation services. In the interest of time, I'm really going to focus on the left-hand side, which is more the traditional integration components. API integration and robotic process automation. AI and document processing fit. I'm not going to cover that a lot, mostly for the interest of time, so we can get more time with Alex. And plus, you've heard a lot about AI today. But they all still fall under this broader category of automation services. Now, API integration, this is very much the same connectors that I was just talking about. It's more if you don't need to bring data into the system and you just need to maybe make a data call to an external system. Instead of synchronizing the data, you can pull it in more discreetly, or you can make a service invocation to perform a particular business function. So on the web services side, I mentioned API and HTTP. We've got connected systems for those and for building connectivity to those exposed endpoints. And then we also have built-in connectors. The built-in connectors save you a lot of time with integration, not only in the area of data, but also functionality. DocuSign is a key example where if you want to have a signed document as part of the business process, you can implement the DocuSign component in order to get the signature and move it through. If the out-of-the-box capabilities are insufficient for your needs, we also have an app market, and the app market has a number of other connectors that have either been built by Appian itself, our employees, our partners, or members of the community. So that covers things like Slack, Dropbox, integration with Visa or Tableau. You can see some of those up there. Essentially, this accelerates your integration mechanism. And again, I kind of thinking back about how we did integration in my previous company, we didn't have these connectors. And I found these to be, again, an accelerator for automation. For those systems that don't expose APIs, your legacy applications, you can use robotic process automation. Again, built into Appian, no additional license, and it allows you to either pull data from an existing system and feed it into Appian, or to take data out of Appian and put it into that system. We're just having some conversations with customers about that today. So RPA supports both applications that are web-based or desktop-based, or even using computer vision, scan documents where you can pull data off of that. You've heard some about some of that today. All right, with that said, I'm going to skip over the pre-built AI agents and just cover quickly process orchestration. Now, Appian allows you in the process modeler to orchestrate all these using business process modeling notation. So a very simple drag and drop interface, and each one of these individual nodes or smart services, you can drill into them and they have configuration options. We've been a leading vendor in this space for a long time, and this is one of the areas that I think our customers love. So much so that the more that they automate, the more they want to automate. And essentially they've started using it for processes that don't involve humans. So more of the unattended processes. And we've seen this over the past, I'd say 5 to 10 years, a rise in higher scale, high throughput automation use cases. Now, if you think about it, from an automation perspective, you want to move people out of the process more, especially in certain cases like financial services, loan applications, or payment resolution. Some of those things you want to streamline and maybe have them rules-based and not have to delegate those decisions to an individual. So this gives you an example of, in different industries, the three main areas that we're focused on, or that we've seen the rise in: straight-through processing, API orchestration, and then also scheduled processing, more your traditional batch-oriented use cases. Now for that, to meet those needs, we built Autoscale. This is our new process engine. It's has been released in 24.4 as a cloud service. But underneath Autoscale, Autoscale in a lot of ways is a packaging of our new process engine. But it really was designed from the ground up for these high volume, high throughput processes. And as Allison has pointed out, others have pointed out, it allows you to, it scales the processing capacity that's available to you without pre-provisioning resources. Now, this is a quick slide. I'd say probably take a quick picture of this if you're interested. We've released this with a very narrow scope, so more for straight-through processing, script tasks, logic gates, writing records, writing to data store entities. In 25.2, we're adding timer events, AI skills, and some additional capabilities in process monitoring and controls. There'll be more coming out over the next couple of quarters, and the intent is to eventually replace our existing engines with this. I'm starting to run short of time, so let me stop talking. We can come back to that last slide if you're interested, but I want to get Alex involved in the conversation and let you hear from him specifically. So hey, Alex.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. Would you mind introducing yourself and just
Sure.
talking a little bit about you and Asplund?
Sure. My name is Alex Flickstein. I'm the Director of Finance Transformation at Asplund Tree Expert. My background is mostly in auditing and accounting, but since I've worked at Asplund, I've been focused on a lot of different technology solutions to legacy problems that we've let kind of go for some time. Cool.
So speaking about that, what are some of the business problems, some of the challenges that you experienced, and how did you define what your automation needs were?
Sure. So a lot of the problems that we face are basically our varied customers across the nation having different ways of issuing us work, of requirements around what we need to capture for them. And so beyond the fact that a lot of it's based on paper, we ran into a lot of areas where we had inconsistency between our data and the customer's data, and then it ends up in an argument of who's right, who had the right data, and started coming to a head in the last few years.
So from that perspective, I guess you recognize the need.
Yep.
What did you do in terms of trying to automate that? What was your journey like there?
Sure. So we took a look at a bunch of out-of-the-box solutions, some larger brand names that thought they would be able to pitch us on work management and being flexible and being able to meet our varied requirements. But at the end of the day, it seemed like it was going to be a lot of configuration and a lot of customization in order to get the outputs that we wanted based on the inputs that we had.
So you got introduced to Appian.
That's right.
And
we've been very happy with it.
Talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
What did you, especially, I've been talking about focus on the business process, maybe share how you guys did that.
Sure. So in looking at our pain points and the things that were bringing down cycle time or bringing up cycle time, we definitely identified the ability to capture data as quickly as possible and then being able to communicate that with our customers as quickly as possible. And so we started by looking at the process of how are they issuing us the work, how are we communicating back to them that the work is complete and what we've done. And through that, we partnered with a customer on being able to integrate with their APIs so that we can be in sync on statuses and different aspects of the work.
So you're first looking at the billing workflow.
Yes.
And then you knew that they had a system and they needed to integrate with that.
Right. In order to have us all kind of reading from the same book, we decided that the best way was for us all to put our cards on the table together, come up with the best process between us and the customer so that this reconciliation exercise that was happening on a monthly basis could be reduced down to a much more reasonable amount.
Yeah, so it wasn't just automating an existing process. It was automating an existing process, but in the process, you were transforming it. You were actually
That's correct.
Rationalizing it.
Yes, and as we kind of have gone through what that process looks like now that it's integrated, we'll find little ways to make it better along the way.
Very cool. Now, how did you roll that out?
So we rolled that out by training a bunch of our users in the field. So these are guys that are building power lines, digging holes to put poles in, stuff like that. And so, we train them all. We've provided some extra support. We've coached them through it all. And over the last, 9, 12 months, we've got a lot of success and a lot of good adoption from the guys in the field. And they've, even told the project manager there that if we take it away, that they're going to quit. So.
Awesome. So that's good, like anecdotal evidence. Do you have any metrics in terms of?
Sure. So we are using this with our largest customers. This will represent something like, our largest single contract customer. It should represent something like $300 million year over year. And we have something like 55,000 work orders that are being issued through the customer system, ingested in our system, and being in sync through the whole thing. So that was 55,000 work orders on paper a couple years ago that are now digitized.
Fantastic. So just you've talked before with others about data fabric and kind of
sure
your thought. Give us your thoughts about both the data fabric aspects and also the mobile aspects.
Sure. So our guys are in the field in a different spot every day. And our customers are all over the country in different places, and they all have a lot of different terms for the exact same thing. And so that's where being able to map the terminology that they may be using in California for a tree they couldn't cut to the same terminology that they're using in Florida for a tree that they couldn't cut, so that our corporate individuals know the story of what's happening on the ground without having to know the terminology of 300 different utilities. Has been very valuable for us, and we're just going to continue to roll that out to more places to try to get us some standardization in the way the data flows to corporate, but without removing any of that like customer-centric facing language you're using on the ground.
Awesome. Any additional plans?
Yes, we do have a lot of additional plans for using the platform. So that example that I gave is our most integrated version that we're using right now. And I would say our plans are to go to our different areas that are having significant difficulties and integrating a process first where we're able to capture all of that customer data in the same way we have been and be able to translate it and deliver it, and then ultimately figure out where an integration with the customer data or the way that we're getting that data now will make the most sense and relieve the most bottlenecking in the process.
Very cool. Totally unscripted. Any thoughts for the audience about what they should be considering as they're approaching their integration projects or their process automation projects?
Oh, I would say the thing that I have found the most valuable is to make sure that we are confident in the process from day one, and that we're not integrating it because the customer can, and that we're integrating it because that integration is going to enable something downstream for us.
So focus on the process.
Yes.
Get people in a room.
Make sure everyone agrees, right?
Agree on it.
That by integrating this piece of the process, we're going to solve the problem we have today in some way, shape, or form. And when we have that buy-in, we tend to have a more successful project.
Thank you.
No problem.
Appreciate you sharing that. All right, Alex will be here to answer questions that you might have from the field, but really appreciate your involvement in this session.
Happy to do it.
So that leaves us to the last point, which is thinking ahead. And this is relatively, well, I won't say that. First, key takeaways. I'm going to have key takeaways and then also maybe looking a little bit ahead more. I've started with this premise that integration is more than data synchronization across systems. And I hope I've kind of made that case both from my perspective and maybe Alex's. I really believe that integration should be thought of in the context of a business process, whether you're using something like Data Fabric and you want to have a single data model, logical view of your data across multiple customer systems and different terminologies so that your enterprise can have a common understanding of what your data is. Or if you're just needing to, integrate with external systems from more of a, during the individual steps of a process. Finally, as we're trying to underline is define your process. You can use Data Fabric. You can use the integration components to create these more dynamic and scalable workflows. And finally, we believe we align very well with Gartner's BOAT concept, providing a unified business-driven, end-to-end process-focused suite of tools for business process automation. That was hard to put together in a sentence. Anyway, but I feel like there's something missing. I talked about integration within the context, like between the start and the endpoints, and that's true. And so we have a lot of individual API calls, and we focus a lot on API-oriented integration. But what if the process starts somewhere else? Now, you can do this today by exposing a web API in Appian, and you can start a process. So that's a lot of ways that we can get data into a system. Or what if you need to do something after the process, either start another process. Again, you can expose an API endpoint and you can invoke that. But in a lot of companies today are moving more towards Kafka and more asynchronous streaming technologies. When I joined Appian about 4 years ago, especially coming from an EAI background, I said, okay, great. We have a very, I hate to use the term robust, but it is a very mature mechanism for developing web APIs and also invoking APIs. But what about asynchronous technologies? What about Kafka? And we didn't really have that at the time. We did have a couple of community-based plugins. The first one on the left we had for a while, and we still do. Kafka Tools plugin allows you to publish to and consume from a Kafka infrastructure. It works with Transaction Manager. For any of you who are familiar with this, there's some latency involved because it essentially reads off of the Kafka topic, writes to the database, and then Transaction Manager picks that up and can do something with that, mostly kick off individual processes. When we released Autoscale, we worked with another group within our organization to develop another plugin to bypass that and reduce the latency and kick off processes at higher scale. This is the Kafka Direct to Autoscale plugin that is also available on the app market. Both of these are available at the app market. And that may be good for most people. I personally would like to have native Kafka support within the platform. And so I'm here to announce that we are starting a Kafka integration beta. We've actually been working on this since probably the fall of last year. I've talked a little bit about this with a couple of other customers, but we are developing a native platform feature for integration with Apache Kafka. And initially the focus is on starting process models, but our vision for this doesn't end there. It also goes to being able to synchronize record types, be able to maybe use it to refresh user interface components, a lot of other things that you can do with it. You can, I see a lot of you with your cameras out or your phones out in order to take a picture of this. If you're interested in participating in this beta later on this year, please let us know and we'll get in touch with you about your specific use case and availability to participate. All right. That is the presentation, and I hope you found that somewhat thought-provoking, and we'll go to the questions. So the first question is, do you recommend for or against leveraging Appian as an enterprise integration hub solution if the counterparty does not have a workflow? And I'll start with that. Okay, and it's a two-part question. So I hate to start an answer with it depends. I believe you can use it for that. I believe my vision is to have, especially being the integration guy who's been doing integration for a long time, I see a lot of value of using Appian for integration. I could have taken a little bit of a different approach with this presentation to talk about using the process orchestration engine we talked a tiny little bit about that for API orchestration. So yes, you can use that. Now, is it a MuleSoft? Not exactly. I mean, we don't have the ability to define topics or queues within Appian. I don't expect us ever to do that. We use Kafka internally more for our own communication inside the platform, but we're not going to allow you to do that. So do I recommend for using it as an enterprise integration hub. I'd really like to understand what your use case is to answer that a little bit more definitively, but I want to say, like, yes, look into that. And if the tooling is there and you've got the Appian expertise, why not? It saves you from licensing or bringing in another technology stack into your organization. Secondly, what is the recommended pattern for interacting with existing external integration hubs and services? Again, I would try to look at that more from the business process, because it really depends on what is it that you're trying to integrate, what is the timeliness of the data. What I mean by that is, when do you need the data for a particular business process? So in the examples that I had, integrating into the data fabric is really necessary when you have a number of systems that you want to build applications, a number of different systems that feed a data model that is going to drive your business process or drive your applications. In other cases, you might just need just be able to invoke individual services like I showed. And so both those patterns, I think, are useful and they're valid. So there are other some of the other integration patterns are what I just spoke to earlier. You can expose APIs from an app for an Appian business process, for an Appian process, and you can expose that as a web API, which can be used by an external integration hub. And I think that's the way a lot of our customers are using it if they've got an ESB or other type of an application. Intriguing questions. I'd like to get into that a little bit more with whoever wrote that, so please feel free to talk to me afterwards. Traditionally, the guidance for large ETL jobs in Appian was to keep them out of process and let the database do the work. With the new process execution engine, how is the guidance around this revised? One of our partners asked me this in our partner product council yesterday. And I also gave what was said to be a weak answer by saying it depends. But you can use the process engine. Autoscale gives you the power that to automate large scale or even smaller scale ETL. I was going to say ETL transformations. It's part of the term, but data transformations and movements. We basically have the power to do that. And a couple of our beta customers had pretty much ETL type transactions that they automated, and they saw a lot more performance gains with the new engine than with the current engines. So yes, it can be used for ETL type transactions. The caveat that I want to put in, and that I said to our partners, that we don't have a lot of the tooling that makes data transformation easier. So you'd have to be doing script tasks or things like that. And from that standpoint, I'm a little bit more reluctant to recommend it, but that's not to say that you can't use it. I think more from a capacity standpoint and a processing capacity standpoint, it can be used. Are there any built-in connectors for Documentum and OnBase for Data Fabric? As far as I am aware, no. However, I want to say, again, in our partner product council meeting, we are working on a team that's going to be focused on some more data connectors. So if that's important, I think I would suggest opening up a product use case if you haven't already, because that way the community can vote on that essentially. And the more product use cases we get, the more we would be willing to prioritize that. I think I'm out of time. Oh, for Asplin.
Sure.
Did you use internal or external resources to develop your application, and what do you see as the best way to scale your future development vision?
Good question. So we used a mixture, but mostly external sources with our great partners at Simplify IA that have helped us to do a lot of the development of the application. And then from the internal side, just making sure everything's kind of operating as intended with our legacy systems, and that our guys on the ground aren't going to be overwhelmed by the amount of change or technology that we're introducing to them. So it was a good mix.
Cool. All right, we are at time. Thank you very much for your participation, questions, and I'll be available if any, and Alex will be as well in case you want to ask us anything more. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.